Board climbing is rocket fuel for climbing progression for some climbers. For others it seems to have far less effect. What's the big difference between these two groups? Is it the setting? Well, sort of, but that's not the whole story. In this episode, as I reset my own board, I'll tell you how to make sure your board climbing gives you maximum improvement. The things that are really important might not be what you think. Well, good morning. It's a lovely spring morning. I'm going to stay in house today. I'm going to reset my board. It's been a long time coming, but my board really needs a reset. I started off stripping the 15-degree board that I normally use for endurance circuits, but I've expanded it and I'm just going to strip all the circuits off my 45 board as well. So I thought it would be nice to make a video about how useful my board actually is. I've had it for about 10 years and it's been amazing. But what I use it for, how I use it, how I set it, how I reset it, all these things. So I actually went on Instagram and YouTube and I asked you guys, oh hello Sparkle, how's it going? I asked you guys to send me some questions about everything to do with setting and training on a home board and the design of the board and anything really. And you sent hundreds of questions, which is cool. So I'm going to try and get to as many as I can in this episode. And I'm sure I'll get good help from Sparkle as well. Trying to make a YouTube video here. Don't you be meowing when I'm trying to talk to these people, right? Are you off? Right, okay. So what I'll do is I'll go through your questions as I'm resetting the board. I'm going to start with a really general thing. A lot of the questions are really focused heavily on details. Some of them matter and some of them, do need demystified, and I hope this episode is a demystifier for you. But in general, I don't think you need to overthink board climbing. And I think I might make this the title of this video, don't overthink it. The board serves a few simple purposes, and that actually brings us to our first question, which is from Gavin. Hey Dave, I'm curious what you find the main benefits of a home wall and if it's needed or encouraged for beginner or intermediate climbers, and if so, how should that climber approach their home training? And there's a couple of related questions, someone asking, would you recommend board climbing for someone who's been climbing for less than a year, and how would the protocol differ from a more experienced climber's protocol? That's a really good question. If not, when would be a good time to start? I've been climbing 9 months and I've been hearing conflicting advice on this. I would say that the single biggest benefit of a home wall is that it serves the most important fundamental pillar of training, which is consistency. Home walls offer convenience, they offer practicality, and both of those things serve consistency. They allow you to consistently push your body over months, into years, into decades, and that's where the real progress lies. So in the rest of this video, we'll get into a lot of the details about setting up the board and arranging the training and all that, but all of that stuff is like the icing on the top. The main thing is just that you're pulling on small holds on steep ground all the time, week in, week out for years. That's what fundamentally matters. First things first, need to finish the D-rig of the old set to wash the wall. And really what a home board does is it removes the kind of scenario where you say, well, I need to go to the climbing wall 3-4 times a week, but I need to drive across town, but I'm quite busy tonight and I've got to be home at this certain time for this other thing I need to do, or I need to put my kids to bed, or etc, etc. So actually it'd be kind of easier if I didn't have to go out and do that journey. But if you had a home board, it's 2 meters from your back door, so you still just go out and do it. Even if you only have, your time gets squeezed, like someone phones you and your 2-hour slot becomes 1 hour for your training, but you can still go out and do that hour, whereas if you had to drive to the climbing wall, maybe that training wouldn't happen at all. Relative beginner climbers or intermediate climbers need that consistency more than anyone. They need to build a base, and professional climbers who have been climbing for 20 years have already done the hard work of doing that. How they may have done that in different ways. I did that by going to crags, which are free. They also have a benefit of allowing consistency if you can access them. If you've made other choices in your life that mean you live in a city and you're far from the crags, then a home board is really an important tool. The other thing is that although climbing walls, commercial climbing walls, have got spectacularly much better, there's so much that's good about them, there are always, with any training tool, some trade-offs. And one of the big trade-offs with commercial gyms is that by virtue of the pricing structure, where an individual climbing session is quite expensive, really expensive actually, and even the memberships are fairly expensive, but the pricing structure is designed to lock you into a membership, and that inevitably limits the variety of the climbing you have. Now, The gyms themselves are so good that within a gym you have a lot of variety, so it's not a major problem. But having your own wall allows you the total freedom to set it up exactly how you want. So if you're climbing at a lower level and a lot of the problems in your local gym are a bit hard for you, you can set easier problems in your own board. If you're climbing really well and a lot of the stuff in the commercial gym is too easy for you, you can fix that on your own board. The purpose of the board, like all training tools, is to push you out of your comfort zone on a consistent basis. Beginner or intermediate climbers need to build strength more than anyone, and so they need to be on this tool as early as possible. Now, I think there maybe is some sort of threshold for entry, which is fairly low. And I've seen this with climbers who I've coached here on this board. Every year I run a handful of group sessions in this wall, and they're very popular. They always sell out. If you're interested in coming to one of them, I would recommend subscribing to my newsletter. I'll put a link below to that. But on those sessions, I've come across some people who are just not strong enough to make a few moves on a steep 45-degree board, even on big holds. And for those people, they may actually benefit from just going away and doing a little bit of basic strength training on a hangboard / pull-up bar first of all. So, if you can't do like 5 pull-ups, for example, then it would be a good idea to spend some time in a gym, set up a pull-up bar in your house, hang from a tree branch. There are things to pull up on everywhere. You can lie underneath a table and do pull-ups. So in the related question about how the protocol would differ between an intermediate or beginner climber on a board like this versus an experienced or professional climber, and I think the primary difference would just be in volume. A professional climber is going to be able to tolerate much more climbing in a week or in a session than someone who's not been doing it for nearly as long. Just the capacity to train is much higher. In fact, that's what I've been trying to regain over the past few months. If you watched my recent video, you'll know that I had a total break from training in the autumn there, so from October until about the new year. So now I've just had 2.5 months of starting to climb again, and really the primary purpose of that has been I've been training to train. I've been building up the capacity to be able to tolerate training in the first place. So the first couple of weeks I've been doing drastically reduced volume, like I warm up and do a couple of hard problems, a little bit of fingerboard, a little bit more endurance work because I can tolerate more of that because it is just lower intensity, and then that's it. So my sessions were much shorter. Now it's easier for me because I'm regaining capacity to train, which I'd already built up over years and decades. If you're doing it for the first time, that process will take much longer. So your ramping of the training load will have to be pretty slow. I've got another video in the pipeline about ramping, very important aspect of training, which I think is overlooked these days. So if you've only been climbing a year, 2 years, whatever, a short time, and you're going to a climbing centre and you're doing mainly the set problems, and you want to get into board climbing because you want to start to do more systematic strength work to improve your power, your body tension, all those factors that boards are really good for training, then you don't need to do tons. You can just go to the board, do a handful of problems for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. Start with half an hour, and then can you tolerate that? If you can, maybe you could start to push that slightly, see what happens, see how your body reacts, see how you feel the next day, the next session, and then go from there. So it's this constant process of just reading how your body handles it, maybe pushing, then consolidating for that for a while, then pushing on a little bit more. These sort of programming issues, they are the sorts of things where a coach can really help you with if you really feel like you're in the dark. But all the coach is really doing is applying those principles of progressive overload. So you can do this yourself. You just have to be cautious. I hope that this video will be a motivator to start training on boards if you don't already do so, and especially to get a board at home. And so a related question to that comes from Slab Justice Warrior, who asks, how do I train board style moves with no gym? I live 20 minutes from very techie Gritstone and 1.5 hours from a gym. I think it would be good to try and find a way around that. So the way I solved that problem was around 15-20 years ago. I didn't have a board. Although I did have access to more varied climbing, I still realised that having my own board would be a very valuable tool for me to move forward with my climbing, as it is for many climbers. And so where I started with that was I started a business, I started a career, really, at first as a climbing coach, and then as a writer, and then as a filmmaker. And in parallel to that, I learned how to do DIY, I learned how to do up houses. So after a year or two of being in business, I bought pretty much the cheapest house that you could buy. I did it up on my own. I sold it for more money. I bought a slightly bigger house.
Earlier this year, Dave and Claire moved to Fort William to be closer to the mountains. Now they live in the shadow of Ben Nevis in what may possibly be the smallest house in the Highlands.
Hello, come in. Welcome to the TARDIS. And 3 houses down the line, I had a house that was big enough to build a board in, and I also had the money to buy some plywood. So that problem took me a few years to solve, but I knew there wasn't really a way around it. There's not really any substitute, I don't think, for having a good access to a good board. Again, it's the convenience factor. It has to be nearby. If it's an hour and a half's drive, that is a problem, and I think it's a problem that climbers should solve whenever they're ready. And if you're not ready, start getting ready. There may be some workarounds. For instance, I know many friends who live in a relatively rural area who said to their local farmer, you know that barn that you've got? Could I do a bit of work here and there for you? Like, can I move that stuff or do a day's labouring for you? And in return, could I build a wee board in your barn and just use it to train on? And the farmer said, yeah, sure, that barn's not doing anything. And they have their own board, which is then free. And possibly there was some wood lying around that they could actually use to build it as well. I've seen people do the equivalent in the city where they have a friend or a work colleague or actually somewhere at their work where there's a space where they say to their boss or friend or whoever, you know that space there, could I build a board in there? And they said, yeah, okay. It's sometimes a case of if you don't ask, you don't get. So it's worth trying to explore these options. Use your imagination. Okay, let's do another question. Daniel asks, I've only done a little bit of setting at my local wall. Any beginner tips for setting generally interesting or flowy moves or anything on setting grades accurately? I think it's possibly difficult to the point of being not achievable to set grades accurately. Grades in climbing walls are absolutely all over the place, and that's always been the case and it always will be the case. So I just wouldn't worry about setting grades accurately, and I just accept that they're just not ever going to be accurate. Hard enough to get outdoor rock climbing grades accurate. The more important question of how to set flowy moves, I think, just comes from understanding climbing. The easiest way to be able to set nice flowy moves is to be a good rock climber and to understand climbing movement and to value climbing movement and be able to hold it in your head. I think the experience just helps you to get closer to a ballpark, especially how to limit the footholds. Limiting the footholds is a fantastic tool to alter climbing. You've got a lot of leeway with setting to get to a rough ballpark by setting the handholds and then do the fine tuning with the footholds once I get my rock shoes on and I start to actually try these moves and see how they fit together. Oh yes, sparkle. Very good, enjoying the sunshine. Just been taking a break, went bouldering in Strathnairn. I've actually got the new Strathnairn bouldering guidebook that's just come out, written by Rob Thomas. Yes! Yeah. I've been going to this area, you know, just south of Inverness for the last 10 years in the winters, just because it's so dry and the bouldering is just really good. This is the first guidebook to the area. I sell this from a website. I'll put a link to it below. Obviously I sell my own books from my website. Like I've just released Moving the Needle, and I often talk about that on this channel. But I also sell all sorts of different books, several books about training for climbing that I kind of curate because I like them, but also some of the guidebooks to Scotland. This is another one that's just come out, Julian Lyne's book on the second edition of the Royal Deeside climbs over in the east of Scotland in Aberdeenshire. And myself and my wife Claire have been sending out books from my website for nearly 20 years. That's actually the main way this channel works. That's kind of what facilitates me to make all these videos. So please do check the link below, have a look, and yeah, I might see you out in Strathnairn. Matt Cousins asked a question about getting attached to problems that you've set, and I kind of do actually. Yesterday I took this problem off and washed the holes and then put it back up where it was because I just really like this climb, and also I can only do it when I'm in really good shape, and so I just want to keep it, and I have the space on this board where I can keep it. It's not taking up too much room, so I like to leave it as a kind of a benchmark. I also have a couple of projects, like I've got a grey circuit on these crimps, which is like a double loop circuit, and I've done the individual loops And I think the long one is probably like an 8C plus root, and the short one is probably like an 8C, thereabouts. But to link them together, I don't know what grade that would be, 9A plus maybe. I know that if I could link them together, I definitely could climb 9A plus. So I sort of have that in my mind as a gauge of my level. And I think those things are useful, as long as you don't overdo it with them. I think that's one of the key messages I can give to you in this video, is if you can cultivate an enjoyment of actually setting your own problems. A lot of your questions and comments have been like, where do I start with setting? Just experiment. Literally just put a hold on the wall. For example, I got these lovely crimps, lovely wood crimps made by a friend, Ewan. I can't exactly remember how I set this problem, but how I would generally go about it is I put one really nice hold there, sort of at head height, and think, right, okay, I need to set 2 moves into that. So this problem is kind of laddery. So I'm going from like a start hold there, bang, to a slightly diagonal hold, and then to another slightly diagonal hold. But the way the footholds are, you do this first move, and then you do a deep flag, like back flag. And the reason you do a back flag is because the foothold's really good to swap feet on it. It's an unnecessary move. And then I hit that and I leave my foot where it is. Even though it's laddery, it still has a lot of interest, because in order to do this move, it's just a little bit far for me to keep my foot on. Like I can reach it just, but I'm never going to be able to, there's so much leverage that I'm going to definitely cut loose. So it's one of those nice moves where you know you're going to cut loose, and so you have to time the moment where you'll jump off the foothold and start to let your body come out, so that you end up in a nice hanging position and the swing is not too violent. And then you have to come back in, kick the board to cancel the swing, and then jump to the next edge. So although this is a laddery problem, it still is really nice to climb. Setting just, there's a spontaneous element to it, and so you don't need to worry. If you set problems and they just don't feel good to climb, then set another 20 problems and you'll get slightly better at it. Set another 20 problems and you'll get slightly better again. I've set thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of problems over the last 30 years, and I still regularly set stuff and go, nah, that's not right, I need to tweak that. So Mark Katz was asking about the dimensions of this board. This board is unnecessarily big. It's like, I think about 6 meters wide, and I think about 4 point something meters high. I can't actually remember. You don't need anything this big, but a lot of people have been asking about what you would do if you had a much smaller board. So there's one, where's the edge of the panel? There's one 8x4 panel. I can't actually see where the top, there's the top of it there. So that's one plywood panel there, 8x4. So some people were saying, if I only have a single panel board, how should I set it? A board that size is too small to do really interesting moves, I would say. So at that point, the board becomes a sort of advanced fingerboard. It's sort of like a little mini system board. So you're just going to be doing snatchy, fingery moves. I wouldn't worry about trying to set technical or interesting moves. And really, like, aside from top end power endurance, you're not going to be using it for endurance training because it's just not big enough. But if you can expand it beyond that even a little bit, so like my old board, I'll maybe try and find some video clips of that. That was, I think, 2.5 plywood panels wide, and it had a little roof that came out. So it was just in a small spare bedroom size. And that board was big enough to set circuits. The width of it really helped. So you could go along the bottom for quite a way, and then go diagonally up the board, and then into the roof on jugs, and then across the roof, and then down diagonally down. So I could set figure of 8 circuits that were about 30, up to 30 moves. And they were really interesting and technical, and they worked just fine. So a board this size is not necessary. This is overkill. It's lovely to train on. I'm so grateful that I have it, but it's more than you need. So coming back to the rough layout of the board, around the edges, I'll set jugs. So I've got all my circuits off. I've just stripped all the circuits off, and I'm just starting to set them again. So like last night, I was setting this circuit on black holes, which is going to go, I think this one will actually be a circle. I'm not quite sure yet. I don't know what I'll do at this end. I'll make it up as I go along. But I think the first hold I put in the wall was that ball up there, and then I set a little section going up here, just as a sort of sequence of moves in itself. And then I thought, right, well, this big blobby hold I want to keep out the way. See, that sticks out quite a lot, so does that. I wouldn't really want that in the middle of the board. This I just have for bat hangs, just to train my tibialis anterior. So that's the only reason that's there, that's just on its own. But I wouldn't want it in the middle of the board because I'm going to batter my elbow off it. Somewhere down here, I'll set some sort of starting hold / rest. I put quite a good hold here, and if I put another one beside it, I've got one good foothold there, then that could actually be a good rest, and it would be an obvious starting point for the circuit, but it would also be a way that I could do the circuit multiple times to have a reasonable rest, just straightforward, 2 holds together. But generally speaking, I've got circuits going around the outside, and then I've got a couple that are figure of 8s because this board is big enough to support it. And then in the middle, I've just got, it's a spray wall, so it's a splattering of holes. There's no particular organisation. I've set these on an ad hoc basis, not in one go, but from session to session, where I've been like, I just really like that hold. I'll try putting it on the wall there, and then I'll set a little problem into it, like so, like that diagonal hold would make a nice move from that hold, and then immediately you're like, well, I could start here, or I could start here, or I could start there and come into it, but come into it as a gas on and that pinch, that. So, you know, straight away you start to think of like all these possibilities. But then there was the issue of replicas and replica training. A lot of people asking about that. I do have some replicas on this board, but I don't even use them all that much. I really think that replica training is one of these ideas that's caught on quite a lot, and a lot of people feel like they should be doing it for their strength training. You don't need to do replica training for your project. It's not essential. It's unlikely to be the thing that gets you over the line with a project you're trying. It's like the icing on the top. It might help to wire in a certain movement style, just to show you. So I've got a replica here of my sport project at Bryn, which I've been trying all spring. But I've just been going and trying the project, and I've got the replica here on my board. But I set this years ago when I first bolted the project, a replica of the crux, which I think, God, I can't even remember how it goes, but I think it's off that up to there. And then the crux on the real thing is just like, you've just got to dead hang this crimp, with a kind of half crimp position. On the real thing, you actually have your thumb on a separate crystal. And I don't have that on the replica because an exact replica is not important. The main thing is just that it replicates the general style, which is just like having the confidence to think I can just lock that. So I just wanted to be repeatedly trying to lock this edge. So I made this move, which is up to an overhead undercut. On the replica, it's harder than it is on the real thing. On the real thing, it's the next move that's the crux, but it's being really solid on this lock that sets you up comfortably for it. So that the replica is like a caricature of the real thing. It's not an exact replica. And often I think that's what makes it really useful. But in general, I know that if I just get to a certain level of climbing, I'll be able to do that project. And getting really strong on a replica, it's only going to make a tiny difference. So this is like the never-ending tendency that people have when it comes to training, which was the main thesis of my book 9 out of 10 Climbers, which is that people get very caught up in the details of training, sometimes at the expense of the fundamental principles that matter, which is consistently pulling on small holds. If you're just bouldering on a steep board, just grabbing small holds and doing hard moves between them, week in, week out, that's all that really matters. And so as I'm actually climbing on the board, I'm just thinking about pulling harder and harder every time, and at the same time focusing on the other major pillar of climbing performance, which is technique. So I'm constantly experimenting with movement and trying to refine and improve my movement and my understanding of climbing movement. That's what the name of the game is. I stick to those basics and I don't overcomplicate it. I think it's about time I got some holds on the wall here, so I'm just going to continue setting this black while talking about Bo's question. Bo said, "Hi Dave, I've been following you for a long time. Really appreciate all the knowledge that you share and all the hard work you put into this. Thank you very much. Regarding board setting and training, why are the available boards like the Moon board and the Kilter board so imperfect? What, in your opinion, would constitute a perfect climbing board? I'm thinking about creating a new type of board and would love to hear your opinion on what's the most important feature you would like to see in this type of product. One of the most obvious issues are poor apps." Well, you could be right about that, but fundamentally, all boards are imperfect and they always will be. I don't think you can have the perfect board. A training board is a training tool, and there are always trade-offs with that. So you may trade off uniformity with interest. So for example, the Kilter board, which I'm not very familiar with, so I might be talking out of my hat, but the holes are all the same colour. They're all reasonably similar, and it limits the variety of holes that you're training on. However, they're all fingery holds, they're edges and pinches. It's not really rocket science. So it's still a great training tool overall. And the app and all the set problems takes a lot of the convenience out of needing to set your own problems. However, even that's a trade-off as well, because setting your own problems, being forced to set your own problems is a benefit. That's an advantage. It helps you to learn technique, and so that adds to the training session. It becomes not just a strength training session. So if I went to a Kilter board, I'd be more inclined to set my own problems. In fact, you may be able to use the app and the fact that you can set your own problems to encourage you to do that and not use it in the way it's designed, which is for people just to consume the problems, but to actually create them. And then you will probably come away with not only stronger fingers, but better technique as well. The other aspect is more of a soft aspect of training on boards and indoor climbing walls in general. It's like the feel of them. So in my mind, when I look at a Kilter board, I feel like it kind of lacks a bit of character, just this bland grey board. I like my board because some of these holds have got a story to tell behind them. For example, this little edge here, I call this my 9A crimp. It's from an old set that I think was done by Entreprise that were designed by Neil Carson, who was a brilliant climber from Wales in the 1990s. He did the first ascent of the Big Bang, which I think, is it still Wales' hardest sport route, a 9A, hard 9A? And he did a route called Mission Impossible, which is an E9, which I repeated myself a few years ago. And I remember the picture of Neil Carson in the climbing magazines not long after I'd started climbing and thinking, wow, that route looks amazing. And it's sat in my memory ever since as something I'd love to do that, and then eventually did it. He designed these holds, and they were a really nice set of crimps, which in some ways hasn't always been bettered. This is another one from the same set, which is a cast off from an old climbing wall that someone gave me. They're really, really good shapes. But I used to have this crimp on my old board, and it just used to be on the centre of a board about head height, just randomly, that's where it was. And I remember just having this thought one day that if I could hang that hold for 5 seconds, I could climb 9A. That would be, I thought that was like an estimation of the finger strength level that I would need to have based on my technical ability. And the reason I was thinking that was because I was trying a 9A project in Glen Nevis at the time that I'd been working on for a couple of seasons. And the day before I did that project, I came back from a trip to Switzerland and I just walked into my board. I think I was dumping my climbing stuff, and I put some chalk on my hands and I hung on the edge, and I hung on it for maybe 4 seconds or 4.5 seconds. And then the next day I was like, oh wow, I'm strong. And then the next day I did the route, so I was right. So there's things like that. There's like stories that I could go into about many of the holes in this board and how they link to memories of routes and periods in my life when I've been training, periods when I felt good, periods when I felt bad. And so every time I come in here, the experience of climbing on this board is so much richer. Right, let's get some holds on the wall. It's going to be a clockwise circuit, so this part is going to be the down climb. Someone was asking about that. How do you make the down climbs on circuits not just totally juggy and interesting? And partly a good way to do that is to actually set them going up the way so that they actually feel quite interesting to climb, and then they'll probably feel interesting to down climb. The other thing is, like, when you've just done a lot of down climbing, then you get used to setting it as well. I've done a lot of down climbing because I'm a trad climber. Trad climbing, you often have to go up, get scared, place a piece of gear, get pumped, come back down. You get good at down climbing. Right, so to give an example, check this thing out. Super positive, juggy edge. Now that would be nice in the centre of the board because it doesn't have a high profile, it doesn't stick out, so you're not going to batter your elbow off it when you're doing a hard boulder problem. However, this would be good for a down climb. So actually what I might do is put it up there in the middle of my campus setup. So I'm going up and down that all the time, and I deliberately never put really lumpy sticky out holes in the middle of that, but I could put that there. So I think I'll do that. So that hole at the moment is kind of an island in the middle of nowhere. I haven't set the rest of the circuit either coming down to it or going down from it, but I just know that that's a well positioned hold for that part of the circuit, if you like, and I'll go from there and just piecing it together like a jigsaw puzzle, really. So I think a generality that comes through most of your questions is that many of them are solved by simply gaining experience in doing the setting. Now that maybe comes out of the tendency of social media to try to sell you the idea that you can shortcut the process of learning quite a lot. Making real gains in physical training, learning climbing technique, and learning to route set cannot be shortcut, in my opinion. If you've lived and breathed climbing for a long time, you're more likely to be a better climber. If you've set a lot of climbs, then you're more likely to be a good setter. Both things have an accelerant in common, which is experimenting, reviewing, and trying to understand. That's how you learn climbing technique. That's also how you learn to set well. To try and figure out what makes a nice move, that's not something that can be easily defined in words. You have to feel it. We've talked a lot in this episode and I've answered lots of questions, and there's still way more that I have to get through. What I think I'll do is, now that I've nearly finished my setting, I'll rejoin you in another episode where I actually climb and get my rock shoes on and climb and test all of these problems, and at the same time go through some more of your questions that still remain. So we'll see you in the next one.